Well, hello and welcome. My name is Ayush Alavadi. Now, profiling users, harvesting and sharing user data with third-party apps, keeping records of user data even after you've deleted your Facebook account, influencing elections, hate speech, the list goes on and on. These are just some of the talking points from Mark Zuckerberg's testimony before the Senate panel and the House panel. Now, the testimony has raised legitimate questions regarding the need for regulating social media, and there's several other questions as well. To discuss that and more, we're joined by a stellar panel. Jeff Hauser from the Center for Economic and Policy Research, Pranesh Prakash, Policy Director at the Center for Internet and Society, and Jitendra Varal of Bloomberg Intelligence. Thank you guys for joining us live on Bloomberg Quint. Jitendra, coming to you first, I'd like to get your thoughts on what you make of these 2 days of testimony from Mark Zuckerberg. Would you say he sort of stands vindicated, or has he sort of opened Pandora's box with some of his responses?
Yeah, it's in the middle somewhere over there. So on the margin, I think he did a great job. He addressed some concerns, but it's not out of the woods yet. I mean, you saw the second day, the questions were a lot more pointed and tougher. And the Pandora's box argument, it's like I said, half and half. So there's still scrutiny going on. You see other countries also asking for him to testify. The FTC is investigating. So they're not out of the woods yet, but he did address some of the concerns.
Right, Jitendra, and I want to get that take that to Jeff as well. Jeff, thanks so much for joining us. Just to get your thoughts on some of the points that actually came to light over the couple of days of the testimony, especially in terms of the Cambridge Analytica scandal. And I'd like to bring up one of his quotes. He says, "When we heard back from Cambridge Analytica that they had told us that they weren't using the data and had deleted it, we considered it a closed case. In retrospect, that was clearly a mistake." So, I mean, that was his tone when he started off, with his testimony on both days. What did you make of Mark Zuckerberg's performance over the 2 days of grilling?
I think that he exceeded expectations on day one, just from a matter of performance. That on day one, people thought he might just be the worst caricature of a coder and somebody who wouldn't be articulate in front of a camera, and he was quite articulate. But as the 2 days went on, the lack of depth and honestly the lack of integrity and accuracy in his answers started to be more and more problematic for Zuckerberg. He made a lot of statements that actually do not stand up to much scrutiny. And the members of the House of Representatives, the lower branch of the American legislature, on day two seemed to learn from day one's questions by the Senate, and they did a much better job. And on Cambridge Analytica, Zuckerberg really never offered a convincing answer as to why, when the Guardian newspaper made very clear what Cambridge Analytica had done in 2015 and how it was being used by a presidential candidate, Ted Cruz, in the United States presidential election, why they didn't act at that point in time. His answer was thoroughly unsatisfying.
Absolutely, Jeff. Pranesh, I want to bring you in on this as well. When it comes to what was brought to light with the Cambridge Analytica leak, that was just perhaps the tip of the iceberg, because when it comes to informing users of a breach, this is what he had to say. He said, "We're investigating every single app that has ever had access to a large amount of information in the past, and if we find that someone improperly used data, we're going to ban them from Facebook and tell them and that everyone's affected." He also qualifies it by saying it'll take some time to work through all the changes we need to make across the company. So he sort of concedes that there are some shortcomings with the way he's approached the whole issue. What did you make of his testimony?
Well, just factually, it is something that will take a long time. I'm not even sure there are the hordes of qualified data auditors that would be needed for such a task. So I don't begrudge Facebook what they have to do right now. It is indeed a tough task. But I do think that a lot of the questions that he faced, both from the Congress persons from the House and the Senate, showed that they didn't quite understand the depth of the problem when it comes to Facebook. I think only one senator really showed that what the problem was, which was Senator Lindsey Graham, when he asked Mark Zuckerberg what an alternative to Facebook is, what the biggest competitor to Facebook is, and if someone didn't want to be on Facebook, where they could go. And Mark Zuckerberg found it difficult to answer that question because there is no satisfactory answer. And that shows that regardless of what kinds of controls Facebook gives people over their data, regardless of how well Facebook behaves as a company, how properly, how within the law, etc., it does so, there's always going to be a problem because we are still dependent on Facebook. And that is not a good situation. We shouldn't be in a situation where we're dependent on a company, and we can't move to any alternative platforms if we have to. And this is where the data portability requirements that the EU's GDPR will be bringing about will be useful to an extent, but only to an extent. We need more than just data portability. We need greater interoperability.
Right, Pranesh. In fact, when he was quizzed on that particular point that you were talking about, when he was asked whether he thought Facebook enjoyed a monopoly, he says he certainly doesn't seem to think so. Jitendra, I want to come back to you with the whole question on data ownership. Now, about the fact whether users actually own their data, this is what he had to say. He said, you own it in the sense that you choose to put it there. You could take it down anytime, and you completely control the terms under which it's used. When you put it on Facebook, you're granting us a license to be able to show it to the other people. I mean, that's necessary in order for the service to operate. Now, this is brought, sort of shed some light upon the entire business model of Facebook and the ad-based model, and essentially what they are doing with your data. Even when it came to a privacy policy, there's been a lot of critics out there saying that at the end of the day, it's very ambiguous and very difficult for an ordinary consumer to decipher that privacy policy or the terms and conditions. Do you think that needs a relook when it comes to how Facebook operates?
Yeah, actually, if you look at the testimony, you saw a lot of them were waving the Harry Potter-like big book of user agreement, and it's sort of so complicated that nobody reads it, and essentially what's happening over here is the data sharing beyond the Facebook ecosystem. Basically came under question over here, right? Like, is it just the necessity for the data sharing for the service to work? Is it only restricted to you sharing your content with your friends and your network, or is it restricted, or the restrictions go beyond that? So basically they have a lot of work to do in terms of transparency into exactly how the data is being used and shared. But as far as the business model is concerned, I mean, you saw in the testimony, it didn't seem like they're stepping away a lot from the way they make money, which is through targeted advertising. So now what you could end up seeing over here is, because of all these regulation and regulatory risks, which we believe that at least in the US, it'll probably be a light touch sort of approach. They'll see where the GDPR goes. But what it does is raise compliance costs throughout the ecosystem. So the impact on Facebook from this, especially this year, is going to be increased expenses from that. But as far as the data user agreement and transparency is concerned, they still have a lot of work to do on that.
Right, Jitendra, it's interesting you mentioned that, and that's something I want to talk to Jeff about. Jeff, you've actually touched upon some of that with a very interesting perspective in one of your pieces on the CEPR website, which is it's in the news. It's very relevant now as well, considering now there seems to be reports that there are calls from across the pond in Europe as well to actually testify out there as well. There are concerns in India. Political parties in India have said, in light of the Cambridge Analytica data leak, that they would clamp down were they to find any more revelations in this particular case, in this controversy linked to India as well, where any sort of influencing of elections was done. But Jeff, I want you to elaborate a little bit about your piece, which is titled "Pro-Corporate Trade Pacts Let Mark Zuckerberg Hide His Face." Do you still stand by that?
Absolutely. Mark Zuckerberg made a big display of the fact that he was testifying voluntarily in the United States Congress, but that was only true in the narrowest of senses. The U.S. Congress has the ability to request anyone in the United States to testify before it at any point in time. So he was going to have to testify, and he knew it. But there are similar requests that have been made by the Parliament of the United Kingdom and countries like India and countries across the world that have legitimate questions for Mark Zuckerberg, Sheryl Sandberg, and other senior officials of Facebook that are based in the United States. But those officials need not actually comply with those requests. So if India wants Mark Zuckerberg or Sheryl Sandberg to come to India and explain its policies and defend them, they can't make that happen, even though Facebook earns considerable revenue in India, just as Facebook earns considerable revenue in the United Kingdom. And it's my view that if you earn the benefit of the ability to make lots of money in a country, you should be able to make your senior executives available for testimony. And right now, Facebook does not have to answer the considerable questions that the UK Parliament and other governments have for it.
Pranesh, you know, that's an interesting point. And whilst this show is live right now across social media and on the network, Navneet Ranjan is a viewer who's commented, and I'm picking this one because it's actually queuing in my next question, Pranesh, which is that he says, hope it is. This company has become a fraud. It's been 2 years. I'm not using Facebook, but they constantly message me to reactivate my account. I want to cue in my next question here, which is something from the testimony as well, when one of the lawmakers actually asked Mark Zuckerberg whether user data was deleted after they actually closed their Facebook account, and as a follow-up, whether he understood anything or he knew anything about shadow profiles. He answered in the negative. Pranesh, do you think a lot more transparency is needed then, perhaps? A lot more clarity on what they do with our data. One, if we're not users of Facebook, and two, if we've deleted our Facebook account.
On the first part, absolutely. But it would be erroneous on our part to think that Facebook is the only company that collects data about those who aren't its users. Getting information from data brokers, getting information from third parties about even prospective users, and doing so is very standard practice. And it is something that should be clamped down upon, but it isn't Facebook alone that is doing this, firstly. And secondly, I think just as outraged as we are at Facebook for quote unquote allowing third-party access to user data, we should be even more outraged at those people who allowed for 87 million people's data to be accessed by agreeing to share, amongst other things, their own private messages for money. So that is how GSR, the company that first got this data that is in question right now with the Cambridge Analytica scandal, they got it by getting people to use an app. Now, why did people use this app that clearly stated that they were going to be collecting your private messages, amongst other things? So, and also the data of your friends. So the people who installed this app had to know this because it was splashed on the screen. So while thankfully I don't use Facebook myself, but I think Facebook users ought to be as angry at their friends and their networks who don't care about privacy, okay, and have obviously shared very sensitive data with a third-party company, as they are with Facebook. Now, Facebook, unfortunately, in response to the scandal, is starting to close in and become more of a walled garden. Now, that is the exact opposite of the response which we need. We need Facebook to become more open and to allow for greater competition to Facebook, which means it needs to keep its APIs available for third parties, and so that people can move from Facebook to another service. Instead, Facebook is becoming more of a walled garden. Now, this doesn't necessarily affect them because let's remember, entities like Cambridge Analytica weren't paying Facebook, so Facebook wasn't making money off that, right? Facebook being a platform is actually a good thing for Facebook users, rather than Facebook being just a closed and walled garden. And unfortunately, the lawmakers who are pushing on Facebook, and indeed many people from civil society and academics and very many people in the policy world, don't seem to be realizing that that is where they're pushing companies like Facebook, and that's not a good thing for the ecosystem. Now, Facebook will still continue to be profitable if it's a walled garden, but if because of privacy, all platforms start closing down and becoming walled gardens and cutting off access to their APIs to third parties, that's not a good thing from user control perspective, from an internet ecosystem perspective. And that's something I think we really need to avoid. And unfortunately, the policymakers, most of them don't really seem to be understanding this with their single-minded focus on privacy and data protection.
No, absolutely, Pranesh. But while you did mention, for everyone watching, that you're not on Facebook, well, that was the second concern that was voiced by lawmakers as well. The fact that even people who have nothing to do with Facebook, well, some of he did talk about cookies as well. So some of their data was being, or some information was being shared. And also, he said this is also, I mean, there have been reports from Facebook employees all over Twitter where essentially they're saying that this was to collect more information for the time that you decide to take the plunge and join Facebook. You'd have a ready friend list because they'd know a few things about your prospective profile. But taking that point to Jeff as well, Jeff, that's actually the key question that I wanted to ask you. Pranesh says that perhaps this is leading to a walled garden approach, which is a very dangerous thing. But if I were to ask you, what is the way forward now for Facebook and for social media platforms, considering there was talk of regulation as well over these couple of days of hearings as well, and they essentially said, when they did ask Mark Zuckerberg, he said he wasn't averse to the idea of regulation. In fact, he thought some form of it is inevitable. That's a big deal coming from Mark Zuckerberg, and he said it a couple of times since this controversy erupted as well. Do you think this requires a big tweak of business model for companies like Facebook? And does that augur well for tech companies and the internet at large?
I think that there are two types of government action that need to happen. And if one happens without the other, we're not going to fix the big problems. One is the antitrust concern. And as one of my panelists pointed out, Zuckerberg's answer as to who his competitor was kind of comically unsatisfying, because there is no direct competitor to Facebook. They do have monopoly power in the United States and in many other countries across the world. So one idea is to take Facebook and break up many of the parts that it has acquired through previous acquisitions. Instagram would be a powerful competitor to Facebook if it were independent of Facebook. WhatsApp would be a powerful competitor to Facebook if we're an independent competitor to Facebook, and they used to be. And that would also address some of the concerns that a different panelist mentioned about the walled garden and the idea that Facebook might have such dominance in personal data that, and in maintaining your social graph, that if they wall themselves off, they'll make even more money and have even greater dominance of the internet and be able to undermine competition. That's a very valid concern. That's why we need to break up Facebook. Data protection concerns are also really important. Privacy is part of it, but data protection encompasses more, I believe, than just privacy. And that's why what I'm hoping to see in the United States is that the new commissioners of the Federal Trade Commission, which is an independent body in the United States, they're going to have it's a 5-member body. There are going to be 5 new members within the next few weeks, and they are going to be tasked with trying to bring the United States up to the standards that Europe has achieved with the GDPR, and maybe exceed those standards. So I'm hopeful that we'll see both antitrust action as well as data protection.
Right, Jeff, and it's incredible the kind of reach and the kind of power and influence that a platform like Facebook enjoys in today's day and age when it comes to elections. And that's another point that I want to raise, because when it comes to preserving the integrity of elections, Mark Zuckerberg said 2018 is an incredibly important year for elections, not just with the US midterms, But around the world, there are important elections in India, Brazil, Mexico, Pakistan, Hungary. We want to make sure we do everything we can to protect the integrity of those elections. Now, I know this is from your body of work, and I want to understand what your take is on it, because what more can a platform like Facebook do to make sure that they preserve the integrity of elections in these respective countries and around the world?
I think they can help provide their readers some understanding of who is and is not a legitimate source of news. One of the big things that happened in the 2016 election in the United States is that Eastern European hackers and tech people created websites that had names that sounded like they could be American newspapers. One of them was the Denver Guardian, which sounds like a newspaper I might want to read, except it's not really a newspaper. But they created these fake presences and put out literally fake news on them, and they tricked a lot of people. And I think that Facebook can do a lot to make sure that entities are real, that entities that claim to be human beings are actually human beings. Because in the 2016 election cycle, what you saw was that when there'd be a fake news story put out there, and then a lot of trolls and bots would like the article, and it would appear in more and more people's feeds. So the algorithm of Facebook encouraged manipulation. Facebook needs to address these concerns with its algorithm, and I don't think we can trust that Facebook itself should make those decisions about its algorithm. Its algorithm should not be totally opaque to government regulators. Right now, Facebook gets to say this is what the algorithm does, as if the algorithm is in charge. The algorithm is actually the product of decisions made by Facebook's engineers, and those decisions should be questioned by government.
Right, Jeff, and as the last question, Pranesh, I want to get your take on that as well. Considering what a massive user base Facebook has here in India, and also the amount of business that they do here, WhatsApp is so popular, Instagram is fast, gaining traction here in India as well. The influencer community is growing larger and larger. Pranesh, considering the popularity of these platforms here in India and the elections that Mark Zuckerberg accepts will be a big challenge and something he'll have to look at. And the fact that the government's been very vocal on this particular issue, do you think a lot more can be done on Facebook's end, and it'll need a lot more policy communication and some sort of outreach or lobbying to placate some of these concerns?
Undoubtedly, from a business perspective, they'll need to do something, or at least be seen to be doing something. But let me also say that I don't believe anything of what the Union IT Minister said in his bombastic statements about calling Mark Zuckerberg and demanding to know how he interfered in elections and how he could allow third parties to access user data and so on and so forth. Because one, Facebook isn't actually being accused of manipulating elections. Which is what the law minister claimed. It's third parties who are using Facebook who appear to have manipulated elections. But then again, 2.2 billion people use Facebook, and a great deal of people try to not just manipulate, but influence elections. Now, manipulating elections and influencing elections are very different. And the kind of powers that an entity like Cambridge Analytica seemed to claim for themselves are ludicrous. Indeed, they were helping with the Ted Cruz campaign, and look how badly Ted Cruz fared, right? So we shouldn't be, falling for a lot of the PR that PR entities put out about themselves. Okay, so insofar as elections are concerned, one new concern that's valid across the globe, whether in Brazil or India, in places where there are limitations put on freedom of expression during times of campaigning and elections, how do those translate online? Now, there is no proper answer to this, because most of the speech regulations apply to candidates and apply to media platforms, which are largely mass media platforms. Now, social media platforms where individuals express themselves might not be regulated in the same way, or currently at least aren't regulated in the same way. And so it's right now an open question as to how they ought to be regulated. And there is no easy, simple answer. It's even leading to a relook at existing election laws, which might not be as useful now as they were some time ago. Insofar as fake news is concerned, now the impact of the young Macedonian shops that came up spreading fake news via the Denver Guardian and so on is massively exaggerated. There is fake news, but in India, a whole lot of it is created by political parties and is spread on platforms that Facebook can't actually, doesn't control via algorithms, and from which data extraction is difficult, such as WhatsApp. So how should a company like Facebook prevent the spread of false, intentionally falsified news on a platform which is a free-for-all like WhatsApp? There isn't actually all that much that they can do. It is up to a responsible media to step up to its role, and if that doesn't exist, if there are media platforms which are intent on spreading falsified news, as exist in India, and as also exist elsewhere in the world, then that's part of the problem. So fake news isn't something that we can lay at the feet of Facebook alone.
Right.
And trying to find solutions over there is the wrong option.
Right, Pranesh, I think those are some fascinating insights. Jeff, thanks so much for joining us live as well. Guys, it's been an interesting conversation. For all of you watching, thanks so much for tuning in. The conversation was live right now, but if you're watching this later, leave your comments in the comment section below. Write to us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, wherever you want to. Mail us and let us know what you think. Are you still, are you averse to using Facebook now? Are you going to move on to another social network? What's the way forward? Let us know. Thanks so much for watching and stay tuned to Bloomberg Quint.